Good morning. My name is Rebecca Nisbet, and I am married. My husband Bill and I attend this church, and we're very, very grateful that we found a place to call home. I want to tell you just a little bit about myself, because we don't know a whole lot of people here in the church, so this might help you to put a face to and a name to somebody that you've watched on the videotape. The first home I can remember was when I was about 4 years old, and we moved from Steubenville, Ohio. My family moved from Steubenville to the northwest part of Columbus, Ohio. And we moved into what was a new build, but they were very, very small houses. It was my mother, my father, my older sister, Pam, and my younger sister, Barbara. And there were 4 years difference in all of our ages. I started school there, but then shortly thereafter, my father, who had been teaching, became a principal in the Columbus Public Schools. And he had scouted out where they were building new elementary schools and further developing Columbus. And so we moved to one of those developments, and I started third grade in a brand new elementary school. Little did I know that my future husband was also in the third grade at that same school. So we went to school together through elementary school, middle school, and high school. And I remember that they had a lot of kids in their family, and that Bill's hair was always practically shaved. His clothes were a little short, his pants were a little short, shirts a little tight, and he and his brother Mark traded clothes just back and forth. I got the idea that they were a poorer family. Bill didn't like me at all because I wore glasses, as I still do, and I was a bookworm, and I also was a principal's daughter, which he thought gave me inside access to answers to quizzes and that sort of thing. So he thought I was privileged, and I thought he was underprivileged and just not very kind. He never spoke to me. Until our senior year in high school. We almost escaped each other. Three months before we graduated from high school, we started dating. And we got married 4 years after Bill graduated from college. And I had graduated in 3 years because, I'm a bookworm. And so we got married at that time. And we had our wedding in my family church, which was a Methodist church. And I had gone to that church since third grade. So he was a Presbyterian, but his mother became the secretary at our church. And so we were very familiar in that church. We had 2 children, Dennis and Mary Lynn, and they were 2 years apart, Dennis being the elder. And Dennis, primarily, I think, because of his father's addiction to sports, became a sports participant. And Dennis was playing baseball, and he played football, and he played basketball. And the basketball ran out for him in high school because I think he's... well, you won't see him. I think he's 5'9", and he's very sensitive about that. He's probably closer to 5'8". So basketball was not going to work for him, and he concentrated on baseball and football. Mary Lynn did everything Dennis did. She was on the elementary school courts playing basketball, and she was playing baseball with all of Dennis's friends. And she became quite an athlete, too. Dennis went to the University of Indianapolis on a football and baseball scholarship. And a year later, Mary Lynn started her college career at Ohio University. Because of Dennis's schedule, Mary Lynn didn't play anything intramural or she didn't play college sports. But because of Dennis's schedule, he was playing somewhere every single weekend and sometimes midweek. So we would pack up Bill's mom and dad and take the van, and we would go wherever he was playing. Mary Lynn didn't seem to mind. She had her friends. She had whatever activities she was doing in college. And curiously, she never invited me for Mom's Weekend or anything like that. But I have to tell you, I was very, very close with Mary Lynn. She has my personality, she has my sense of humor, and we're very, very close. So even though we didn't visit with her a lot in college, she was an hour and a half away and came home when she missed us, and we were always on the road with Dennis. Dennis met the love of his life after graduation. He met and married Liz, and Liz and Dennis are now teachers at the Villages High School. And Dennis coaches, he just stopped coaching basketball because he has 2 children and wanted a break and to be able to spend some time. So he's coaching football and he coaches baseball. And Liz, she is so intelligent, and she is such a time manager that her children are into some activity all the time. And she teaches something like robotics, mechanics, or something like that, but it all involves things that I don't understand, but she's a fantastic teacher. And a great resource for me, especially as I struggle with my iPhone and my computer. All I have to do is call Liz and she has the answer, or she comes over and fixes the problem for me. We're very, very close. Mary Lynn, her senior year of college, went to Florida to do a retail merchandising apprenticeship. And while she was there in the city of Sarasota, she met a young man who was not her type at all. She called me and she said, "Mom, I've met this guy and you're not going to believe it. He's just like Dennis. Very straight-laced, very into sports, just an outstanding young man." And she said, and in fact, I don't know, his dad had something to do with the Orlando Magic. And I said, "Oh, okay, well, we're anxious to meet him." So she brought him home for Christmas one year, and Bobby became, I should have started with this. My sharing is titled Three Influential Men in My Life, and Bobby is the first influential man. He's a lifelong Baptist church member. His father is extremely religious as well as sports oriented, and just one of the finest men that I know. And we fell in love with him immediately. Bobby wasn't real sure that he wanted to get married. It had something to do with some family history and his folks' marriage that fell apart. And he just kept telling Mary Lynn, "Well, why don't we just keep things the way they are? We're both happy." And she said no. She said, "If this is not, I need a family. I want a family. And if this isn't leading me to what I want as well as you, then we're going to have to go our separate ways." And that lasted about a month. And Bobby called her and said, "I can't live without you. Will you marry me?" basically. And she said yes. So I had both children within probably a period of 2 years, had beautiful weddings. Dennis and Liz chose their wedding on the beach in Sarasota with a reception back home. And Mary Lynn went for the whole 9 yards at a lovely, lovely place on the river that goes through Columbus, Ohio. So we had 2 wonderful, beautiful weddings. About that time, I started, well, my mother's health was failing. She had Alzheimer's. And I was nearing retirement, and I told Bill that I would not retire until things with my mother were at least settled and she was comfortable living in a home. We started looking around for places to live, and we found the Villages and fell in love with the Villages. So we decided that I was going to retire. By this time, Mary Lynn was pregnant with twins. And we decided to move to the Villages. I would be down here to help her, and Bill was going to finish his work at Nationwide Insurance so that we would be cumber-free when we came down to live in the Villages. Mary Lynn had her twins. They're 2 little boys, and now they're 8 years old. But the problem soon arose that, first of all, what shook my faith was my mother died, and it took her like 7 days to die in the nursing home where she was. And it was a terribly, terribly traumatic experience for me. And I questioned my faith because I was of that mentality that God has his hand on everything, and that he if there's a destruction or there's a bad accident, people always say, why did God allow that to happen to this person? That's the way I was feeling about my mom. Why did he let her suffer so long? And it shook my faith. But when Mother was gone, then we made the move to the Villages, and I was at the birth of my 2 grandchildren. They were both very small, and they're small today too, even though they're 8. But a couple of years into, I left this out too. Bobby is a scout for the Angels baseball team, and so he works from the end of February until the World Series is over. And he just comes home every once in a while to touch base and to work on reports and to see his kids and see Mary Lynn. But the rest of the time he's gone. Mary Lynn did fine like the first 2 years she had the kids. And then all of a sudden her behavior became very, very erratic. I, again, was down to Sarasota to figure out what was going on. And she had all of these strange ailments. She was leaving work in the middle of the afternoon every day because she felt like she had the flu. They thought it was gastroenteritis or something internal. She had every test done that she could have done. And finally, her boss took pity on me, and he said, after lunch, I believe Mary Lynn is drinking heavily. I was dumbfounded. I had no clue, but it turns out that is exactly what it was. She is a full-fledged alcoholic. This again, I questioned my faith, but by this time, Bill and I had found this church. And the first time that we came to church here, Harold was preaching a sermon on I Know a Guy. And it was all about, his allegory was men of influence that he knows or comes across. Somebody who could always, get him an introduction to somebody, or just people who have very broad range were drawn to him and he to them, and he could use them as resources, and always in the name of helping somebody. So anyway, the sermon was, I know a man, but of course the real story was, I know God. And Bill and I were sitting, I'm looking at the seat where we sat that day, and this little man came bounding across the stage, and he started shouting something about a place we call home, and the whole audience rang out with home. And I leaned over to Bill and I said, well, he must be like the assistant minister, because we expected somebody like we were accustomed to, who stood at the pulpit and read from a script. Man, were we surprised. From day one, we were hooked, not only on this church, but on Harold. To help cement things, Harold's son Cameron was playing basketball at the high school. And we didn't know it at the time, but we were watching one of the freshman teams because my son Dennis was coaching. And I said, Bill, I think Pastor Hendren is sitting across the gym from us. And I pointed him out, and he said, yeah, I wonder why he's here. I said, I don't know. But then pretty soon we saw a kid from Dennis's team run up the stairs, put his hand out, and Harold gave him some money. And I said, oh, maybe that kid goes to church and Harold's giving him money to. Turns out it was Cameron. And it turns out that he was on Dennis's team. And that helped us secure a little bit of an intimacy with Harold and then with Donna. So Harold's father died, and he took it extremely hard. 2 months after that, Bill's father died. And we were headed to Ohio, and Bill was doing the eulogy. Now, Bill is not a public speaker at all, but it was his father, and he was the oldest child. So he was steeling himself through his emotions to do this eulogy. I reached out to Harold, even though it was his father's death was still fresh in his memory, and I asked him, is there something you can tell me that would help Bill? And he said, I'll call Bill. And a couple of hours later, he did call Bill and talked with him. And the effect on Bill was pretty, it was obvious. You could see that he was more relaxed. And what a wonderful person Harold was to take his time in his own grief to help somebody else out. So Harold has become my number 2 man. Bobby is one, and then Harold is the other. And the third is my Almighty Father, who I became reacquainted with through Harold and through this church. Because as you will remember, I was very disenchanted with the way my mother died. And I started seeing things in a completely different light. I now believe that God does not control actions and catastrophes and COVID, but what he does is he gives us the strength, if we're willing to humble ourselves and to ask him, to cope with anything that is thrown in our way. Going back to Mary Lynn, I could tell you stories that would curl your hair if you had straight hair and would uncurl your hair. Bobby had to work. He had to bring in income. And so he was gone. And Mary Lynn was there with the kids. We now knew that she had a drinking problem. So I took up residence in their house. And I can't tell you the number of times. In Florida, you have to commit yourself for treatment. I think they have found that if you don't want to change, if you don't want to fight alcohol, then there's no point in somebody else committing you, because they can just sign themselves out and their treatment is over. There was a thing called the Baker Act, which I became very familiar with, but we never used the Baker Act because I did not feel that I was physically in danger. But I'll tell you, she was cunning. She was, she knew which words to hurl at me. There were nights that I would pick up the boys from kindergarten, and we were locked out of the house. And I would have to call the fire department, and they brought police. And neighbors were standing outside watching, and they broke the door down once. There were 2 suicide attempts. Just a range of very, very horrible things. And of course, I had what were 5-year-old twins who were clinging to my legs as I waited for firemen to open up the house for us and we could check on her. She called me every name in the book. And they always asked me if I was afraid of her, because they would have Baker Acted her at that point. And I said, no, I'm not afraid of her. Somehow we had to get her to voluntarily agree to go into treatment. She finally did agree, and we got her in for a 3-month stay at a place in Tampa, which we had high hopes for. I attended some sessions with her and found out that she became an alcoholic in high school. I had no clue, none. I was dumbfounded. She was also bulimic in high school. And I'm sure you all know what that is, but it's not keeping food down. And if all else fails, then you force yourself to throw up. Where this all came from, I don't know. But she was quick to blame Bill and I for all the time we spent with Dennis while he was in college. And of course that hurt. Because she's my girl. We're buddies. I mean, we would spend hours talking on the phone. And to hear her say those things to me was just like cutting my heart out. Harold knew all of this because every once in a while Bobby, as often as he could, would come home on the weekend. And I would come home and spend a quiet weekend with my husband and my dog and with Harold on Sunday. Harold, his sermons, I picked something out in every single sermon like he was talking to me. He talked about broken people. That was me. I was pretty broken. Bill was broken too. But he didn't have, Bill was more angry than I was, and we didn't need anger in this situation. We didn't need somebody else yelling at her. And I've always been the family fixer until it came to this. So the 3 months were up. She came home and promptly was drunk again, like immediately. We talked and badgered her into going back again. So she went back for another 3 months, and this time when she came home, she had bonded with the people she was having therapy with. And when we came to visit, in fact, one young woman was there, and Mary Lynn, who's a fastidious housekeeper, we walked into the house and the vacuum cleaner was upside down in the living room, and the refrigerator doors were open, and you get the picture. It was horrible, but this friend from rehab was with her. So Bobby and I conferenced again, and he reached out to some family friends of his father's, and we found a place in Arizona that would take her. And she spent 3 weeks in Arizona, and she was very receptive to that program. And when she finished with that program, we sent her to a halfway house in California, where she was given a certain amount of money and allowed to go into a store and walk past the wine and the alcohol and not purchase. It was a way of acclimating herself back to the home before she was released. I remember the kids. They're 2 boys, Teddy and Jack. Jack constantly asked me about his mother, and we told them that she was on a business trip, which they were used to their dad taking business trips because he was scouting. Teddy never once mentioned his mother to me, never once. I could tell that he was listening when Jack asked that he was listening, but he didn't stop whatever activity he was doing. Bobby took pictures of them when they went to the airport to pick Mary Lynn up from California. And Bobby told them that he was picking up a friend, and he gave each one of them a rose. And he started filming, and Teddy and Bobby saw Mary Lynn, and Jack took one step and stopped, and his mouth fell open. Teddy saw his mom. Teddy, who had never mentioned his mother, went tearing through the airport and tackled her. Jack just kind of stood there, and his head was to the side, and he took another step. And then by that time, Mary Lynn was there, and it was like he couldn't believe that she was real. This time, they spent Christmas in Orlando with Bobby's family. And she called and said, Bobby went to his meeting, and I'm coming home with the boys. I'll be in the Villages in 2 hours. I said, okay. 4.5 hours later, she called, and I knew she was drunk. She said, I'm lost. I can't figure out where I'm supposed to go. And I said, well, where are you? I'll give you directions. And she said, well, this is your town. You should know. I mean, just belligerent. And I'm thinking, oh my God. I said, Mary Lynn, are the boys in the car? And she said, of course they are. We're coming to your house. I asked to speak to Teddy, and she turned around and gave the phone to Teddy. He said they were parked in a McDonald's, and there was a cigar store across the street. And I said, Teddy, I need you to be very, very careful. Get out of the car and let me talk to the McDonald's guy. He did that. The McDonald's guy said, yeah, we're watching the car. We know there's 2 kids in there. I keep sending water out. I said, please make sure the car doesn't leave. They were still in Orlando. I called one of Bobby's relatives. I told him where they were. She said, I know exactly the McDonald's. We'll have the boys in 5 minutes. And she called back and she said she had the boys. This was after 4 3-month sessions away from us and coming home sober, dry, clean, and in 2 days it all went into the toilet. Got Mary Lynn. We drove down to Florida. We got Mary Lynn. Mary Lynn rode with Bill in the car, and I drove the kids. They said that when they found Mary Lynn, she was slumped over in the driver's seat, and the bottle was between her legs, and she was out, just out. The good part of this is that since the 5th of January, shortly a week after that, she has not touched a drop. She's an avid member of Alcoholics Anonymous. She has a sponsor. I talk to her every day. I know when she has, I know that voice. And she has not touched a drop. So she's approaching 2 years sober. What made the difference in her? I don't know. I know that she missed a lot. She missed the start of first grade of the boys. She missed all the weekly projects that they give you for kindergarten. I mean, every week it's something different. Build an aquarium. You don't buy anything. Just whatever's in your house. Build an aquarium. The scarecrows. They gave us a stick and we had to make scarecrows. Of course, there were twins, so we had to do two. So it was the two of them and me doing all of this, but she missed it all. I'll tell you one last thing. Teddy is quite an accomplished artist, and in kindergarten, before Mary Lynn started her first stint, there was an art show at school, and one of his pictures and a sixth grader's picture, or art project, I'm sorry, were chosen to represent the elementary school at the area art show. I was blown away. I mean, he's just a kindergartner, but apparently it was one of two of the best. I asked Mary Lynn to snap a picture of it and send it to me. She said she would. To back up just another minute, Ohio is famous for its cardinals, and my mother loved cardinals. My mother that died that horrible death. She had cardinals all over the house, little miniature cardinals. And when she died, I took two of her cardinals, and they're at home with me. Teddy didn't know any of this. The picture that he drew was of 3 cardinals. I have 2 sisters, 3 of us. It's a beautiful picture. I had it made into like a simulated painting. I gave my 2 sisters copies. God reaches out to us. You have to listen sometimes. I think the verse that I love the most from the Bible is Psalm 23. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and I interpret that as conflict. There's a serious issue, not really death. I will fear no evil, and Harold taught me that. He taught me to trust in the Lord again. So God in His wisdom, Harold and Bobby got me through this. Peace at Christmas to all of you. Thank you for listening.